old-time radio spokesperson. He's not very old, but his subject matter is, this is Chuck Schaden. He's a kid. He must have started listening when he was 3 years old. He has been on radio in Chicago for about 24+ years. I think by next spring he'll celebrate the big 25th anniversary. And if so, he may have lasted longer on radio than old-time radio in its original form. We usually think of it from about 1935 to about 55 as far as the glory years of old-time radio. Come on, come right in.
We always like to know. Just in time.
Okay. Chuck has come down here to visit some of his family. His wife is, where is Ellen? She's back there. Okay, his wife Ellen is back here. They're in the Chicago area if you'd like to listen to old-time radio, and I think there's some people who know about Chuck already. He is on WNIB, which is 97.1 FM, just down the line if you're a Rensselaer listener from WLQI. There's your plug, John. Just dial down, 600,000 kilowatts. And you'll find Chuck Saturday afternoons from 1 until 5, and he will pack into 4 hours of broadcasting, more than you could possibly hope for in old-time radio. Right now he's on a 4-year cruise of a tribute to World War II. So a lot of his shows relate to World War II. He has a lot of news broadcasts, special interruptions for war news, and it's history as we heard it in the 40s, or as some of us heard it in the 40s. Yeah. Sorry. I heard it later. I listened to Chuck. If you're a night owl, he is on WBBM AM every night at midnight with another hour of old-time classics. And so without further introduction, I introduce a fellow who is not only a keeper of old-time radio, a man who contributed tens of thousands of old-time radio shows to the Museum of Broadcast Communication, but he was also named as the first, and I can't remember the exact name, I want to say People's Choice. Members' Choice. Okay. As one of the members, I was proud to see Chuck go in as a Hall of Fame member. So we have a Babe Ruth of radio right here, Chuck Schaden, and I know he's very proud of that honor, not only because he was elected, but he was sort of one of the founding members of the museum in Chicago. If you'd like to visit that, that's on Michigan Avenue. If you have any other questions, I'm sure Chuck will be happy to share them with you, or if I can help you with any of the directions to the museum, or how to get to Chuck's Metro Golden Memory Shop, or how to get the Nostalgia Digest, just ask away. But I'll turn this over to Chuck. Thank you. That was the greatest commercial I have ever heard about. How much do I owe you? I'm real happy to be here. It's a pleasure to spend a little while with you talking about old-time radio. And we're going to take you back. Now, some of you were not there. Some of you, a lot of you, were not there. At the time it happened, as Bill says, the golden age of radio was probably 1935 to 1955. Now, you could expand on that a couple of years in either direction. But basically, that was one of the shortest golden ages of all. And it produced for us some of the best possible entertainment that we could ever have. And it was free. It was absolutely free. You just turned on that radio, set your dial, and use your imagination. And that was a wonderful thing about radio. You had to use your imagination. Now, I'm talking about radio in the golden age. Now, the actors behind the, behind the microphone. Your clothes are going to need some of this water. The actors behind the microphone provided the voices. The sound effects men gave you some of the sounds, and the musicians, whether they were an organist or a pianist or a full orchestra, set the musical scene. But the listener had to participate. The listener decorated the sets, the listener costumed the actors, and the listeners saw that the hero was as tall and as strong and as handsome as you wanted him to be. And the heroine was as soft and as lovely and as beautiful as you wanted her to be. And the listener decided that that black sedan that was speeding down the highway, decided that it was a Ford or a Chevy or a Hupmobile or a Stutz Bearcat or whatever he wanted it to be.
That was the magic of radio. You were a participant. Radio in those days was a participatory sport. Radio today maybe is a not so participatory unless you're calling in a talk show, but it's really a spectator sport, and so is television. Television is a spectator sport. You sit there and watch what someone else has decided you should see. But in the great days of radio, you and I could be sitting in the same room listening to a single program, the same show, and we would each see something a little bit different. You might see a tall, handsome, leading man, and I might see a short, stubby guy. It all depended on what we did with our imagination. And that's what I want to do this evening. For a little while, I want you to use your imagination to drag you back by the collar to those good old days of radio. And we're going to talk about the programs, and we're going to talk about growing up with the good old days of radio. Now we're going to start off with one of the most famous sounds in the history of radio. This is a sound that means radio more than any other sound.
With the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a line of silver, the Lone Ranger. With his faithful Indian companion Tonto, the daring and resourceful masked rider of the plains led the fight for law and order in the early western United States. Nowhere in the pages of history can one find a greater champion of justice. Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear. From out of the past come the thundering hoofbeats of the great horse Silver. The Lone Ranger rides again. Come on, Silver! Let's go, big fella! I'm Silver! Hey!
The Lone Ranger. What excitement! We used to listen to that 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Now I grew up in Chicago, same time zone as Rensselaer. So this was on at 6:30, and we raced through dinner, my brother and I, so we could run into the living room, get in front of that radio and listen to this. There was, by 7 o'clock when the program was off, there was a layer of dust an inch thick on the floor because of all the Western excitement in it. Little Lone Ranger trivia. Why did the Lone Ranger use silver bullets? Why did he have as his hideout an abandoned silver mine? And why was his horse named Silver? Anybody know?
Did he melt down his badge?
He did not melt down his badge. His original sponsor was Silver Cup Bread. I'm really glad he wasn't sponsored by Butternut. I mean, hi-ho Butternut. It was an exciting radio program. Although I must say that when I was a kid listening to the Lone Ranger every night, a very terrible thing happened. I couldn't understand it. The newspapers were filled with the reports. The radio news had this on it, that the Lone Ranger had died. In fact, he was killed in an automobile accident. What was the Lone Ranger doing in an automobile? How could the Lone Ranger die? Well, what happened, now I was just a few years, I was a few years younger, and I didn't understand, but the actor who played the Lone Ranger was killed in an automobile accident. His name was Earl Grazier. Well, they had to do something. This was a very popular radio program. Obviously, the actor was dead. The radio show had to go on. They needed another actor to play the masked man. But the listening audience was very keenly tuned in to the voices they heard on the air. So they had to distance the audience from the voice that they had heard. So for 2 weeks, in quickly revised storylines, the Lone Ranger became very seriously ill. So ill, in fact, that he couldn't speak. And so for those 6 episodes, all we heard was the Lone Ranger's heavy breathing. while his faithful Indian companion Tonto nursed him back to health. And at the end of 2 weeks, the Lone Ranger rode again, and the voice belonged to Brace Beamer, who had been a narrator on the program. A familiar voice to listeners, but now a very good sound-alike for the original Lone Ranger. That was in 1940, and the Lone Ranger continued to ride the radio range until 1955 with new radio shows. Started in 1933 as the first Lone Ranger broadcast. Even today, the Lone Ranger is still heard on the radio. In fact, we do play broadcasts of the Lone Ranger on our midnight program on WDBM. So the Lone Ranger was one of the great radio shows, and of course that opening, that William Tell overtures that they used, you know. Now you could never, ever go to any kind of a concert hall and hear the William Tell overture without thinking of the Lone Ranger. I remember in a music appreciation class in 8th grade in grammar school, the teacher comes in and she says, "Now class, tell me the name of this," it wasn't a song, it was a piece. "Tell me the name of this piece." She put on there, and Rossini's William Tell overture starts up, and every kid in the class yells, "The Lone Ranger!" The teacher died. She really was mad. But you could never hear the William Tell overture without thinking of the Lone Ranger. Now, I have a question for you. And if you can answer the question, I want you to answer it now. Right? Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? This is an old group. This is an old group. The Schaden. Lamont Cranston went to the Orient, where he learned those hypnotic powers to cloud men's minds so that he could fight for the causes of law and order. And the only one who knew the voice of the invisible shadow belonged to Lamont Cranston, wealthy young man about town, was his constant friend and companion, the lovely Margot Lane. Now, she was never just Margot Lane. She was always the lovely Margot Lane. If you remember the Shadow radio program, don't, I repeat, don't see the movie. If you don't remember the Shadow radio program, see the movie. Special effects, lighting, costumes, okay. But it has nothing to do with the radio show. Except they have Lamont Cranston and the lovely Margot Lane. The sponsor, the longtime sponsor of the Shadow, was Blue Coal, America's finest anthracite. And the Shadow had a very unusual season on radio. Most radio programs went from mid-September, early October, until the end of May, middle of June. The Shadow season started in July, and it went until the end of March or early April, because they were selling coal for the coal furnace. Does anybody remember coal? You got some in your stocking. One in your stocking when Christmas got some. But that, you know, that's the thing. Coal was the heating element of choice for people, or no other choice, I suppose. That was what we heated our homes with in those days. We had a big coal furnace in our basement. We lived in a bungalow, and we had a big coal furnace in the basement. Gigantic thing like this with giant pipes like octopus tentacles clinging up to the ceiling to every room in the house. And we would fire this furnace with coal. Now, where did the coal come from? It didn't just materialize in the basement. I always remember this one morning, sometime usually in the middle of the summer, a truck would pull up in front of our house, and it would unload a ton or two of coal right on the street in front of the house. And the truck would drive away, but there was a man left standing there, a man with a shovel and a wheelbarrow. And it was his job to get this coal from the street in front of our house into our basement. Now in the basement we had a coal shed, coal bin. We had a wood shed and a coal bin. And getting the wood for the wood shed was another thing, but we stoked up the coal a little bit. So all day long he would shovel coal from this pile in front of the house into the wheelbarrow and take it down the gangway to a window in our basement. And the window would be propped up, and he would shovel, empty the wheelbarrow into the basement window, and the coal would slowly fill the coal bin. At the end of the day, miraculously, the day ended, the coal was gone. Now what is this guy going to do? Did he leave the wheelbarrow there, upside down, in front of the house? He'd take the shovel, and he'd walk 4 blocks to the bus, and he'd get on the bus and go home, and then the next day, or the streetcar. But we had a feeder bus, that ran for about 1.5 miles, and then you transferred and got into the streetcars. And the next morning, if you were out on the street, you'd see this coal truck come by, filled with coal again, stop, pick up the wheelbarrow, and you'd see sitting next to the driver of the truck the same man with the shovel, and away they'd go to the next place that was going to get coal. Now, when you wanted coal in your home, in your furnace, you just shoveled, you put some paper in there, you throw some wood in there, and you shovel some coal into the furnace, and you light it, and you wait for it to heat the house. Well, sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't, but usually you could bank the coal pretty good and heat your house okay. Now I remember when we would go visiting relatives on a Sunday. Remember when we used to visit relatives on a Sunday? There's nostalgia and everything. We'd have a nice, in the wintertime of course, we'd have a nice fire going in the furnace, and we'd go out, my mother and dad and my brother and I, and we'd walk the 4 blocks up to the bus, then take the streetcar, and we'd go to visit my Aunt Darlene someplace. And at the end of the day, after being out all afternoon, somebody for dinner, coming back late at night, trudging along with my mother and dad holding my brother over his shoulder, late at night, 9:30 maybe, Sunday night, walking to the house. It was cold. My dad says, "Come on, Chuck, we're going downstairs." We go down the stairs. You open the door of the furnace. Fire would be almost out. A few glowing embers in there. He said, "We got to get some more coal in here. We got to get rid of the embers first." Well, there were some real clinkers in there too. Stuff ashes that wouldn't fall through the grate, So he had some kind of thing like a long tong arrangement. And he would stick that in there, he'd work it over here, and he could pick up the clinkers, put them in a steel bushel basket here, and then he would shake the side of the furnace, and it would rattle the grate in there, and the ashes would fall to the bottom. Like that. They all fall down. Then he'd shovel the ashes into a second steel wastebasket. Now what do we do with that wastebasket full of ashes? This was the greatest thing that any motorist ever had. You put it in the trunk of your car, because if you ever got stuck on ice during the winter time, you would just shovel some of these ashes under your tires, your back tires, your front tires, and away you'd go. Did a better job than chains and studs or anything else. So we always had some of those there, and if we had excess, and we often did, we would just toss that out in the unpaved alley behind our house, and anybody could go up and down that alley, because every house had big brown ashes stains up and down the alley to see them. So there was, that was like recycling. I don't know what it did for the atmosphere, but it was some recycling. For many, and then we'd build a fire again, and the house would be toasty warm when we'd go to sleep. Now, I can always remember my dad reading the newspaper, reading magazines, and seeing a wonderful invention called the iron fireman. The iron fireman was a stoker. an automatic stoker. And the idea behind this automatic stoker was that when the thermostat fell to a certain point, the iron fireman would automatically send coal into the furnace. And you could then sit upstairs in your easy chair. Of course, they always pictured a man in his easy chair in the gas. And your furnace would get more coal, and you would never have to bother. You would not have to go down into the cold basement. You would not have to suffer with a cool home. What they didn't say was that when the iron fireman went to work, the whole darn house shook. But it worked. What the iron fireman didn't say was that somebody still had to take the ashes and the clinkers out of there. But it was a special time. You know, years later, then after the war, they put in a permit to get oil or gas. You had your choice of oil heat or gas heat. And a lot of people were converting to oil, and when the coal was gone out of the coal bin, then it was replaced by a gigantic oil tank. And I don't think anyone who ever had a heating oil tank ever experienced one that did not leak, right? So you always had oil spill in the basement. So later we got gas heat, and they took down the coal bin, and they took down the wood shed, and it was amazing. And they took this big furnace out of here with these giant tentacles. We had a basement under there. We never realized that. It was amazing stuff. I talk about the house that we grew up in. It was a 5-room brick bungalow on the northwest side of Chicago. Actually, it wasn't in Chicago. It was in a suburb that was unincorporated until a number of years later. Anybody know where Norridge is in Chicago? Well, yes, you do. That's where we grew up. And we had a living room, dining room, 2 bedrooms separated by a bathroom, a kitchen, and an unenclosed back porch. Now, on the floor in the living room, we had a rug. Not a carpet, we had a rug. Not wall to wall, a rug. I don't know, 10 by 12 or something like that. It didn't cover the whole floor. We had a wonderful border of hardwood floor, very nicely polished, varnished and polished. The rug was kind of a red oriental paisley kind of a job with fringe all around. Now on one wall we had a brown mohair sofa. On the other wall we had a matching brown mohair easy chair. And on the arms and on the back of the sofa and the easy chair we had little lace doilies, antimacassars, held in place by straight pins, which never held them in place. Because every time you sit there, you get this pin would get caught in your sleeve and come out. But anyway, it was there to protect the mohair sofa, and especially on the back of the sofa in the easy chair, where you put your head. It was to protect it from the greasy kid stuff on your hair. You know. But I tell you, there's no way that you can ever ruin a mohair sofa. Years later, my folks got very modern. They decided to reupholster it. Those were the days they reupholstered the furniture. Did not send it out. It was still strong. It was well built. You just got new upholstering on it. Sent it out, got new upholstering, and it lasted another 20 years or so. Between the sofa and the easy chair was a floor lamp. This high, big lampshade on there, brass stem, and at the base of the floor lamp, there's a little wrought iron work down there, and lifted up upon that wrought iron work was a kind of a green onyx glass. And under the glass, excuse me, there was like a little white Christmas tree light under there, activated by a little button that you press, you see. Now, kitty corner from the floor lamp was in our living room the greatest piece of furniture that we had in our house. It was a Zenith console radio. This radio was this wide and that high, or so it seemed to me. I was only this high at the time. But this was so exciting that the word Zenith, the name Zenith, was written in lightning letters on the face of the dial. And the dial had all the call letters of the Chicago stations right printed right on it. WMAQ, WGN, WBBM, WAIT, WLS, WENR, WCFL, WAIT, WJJD. And all those call letters stood for something. Oh, they meant something. WGN was owned by the Chicago Tribune, the world's greatest newspaper, WGN. The WLS was owned by Sears Roebuck and Company, the world's largest store. WJJD was owned by the Loyal Order of Moose, and the number one man in that organization, the national organization, was the United States Secretary of the Interior, James J. Davis. So they tipped their hat into his direction and called it WJJD. WCFL was owned by the Chicago Federation of Labor. WENR was owned by the E.N. Rowland Tube Manufacturing Company, makers of tubes for Zenith radios. WBBM, and you remember the WBBM Air Theater, Wrigley Building, Chicago. WBBM was owned by the Columbia Broadcasting System, but they broadcast initially out of the Broadmoor Hotel in Chicago, and WBBM said, "We broadcast Broadmoor music." Later it became world's best broadcast music. So we had all these call letters right on the dial, and it was so exciting. And at the top of the dial, was a little green eye. And it was kind of had a pie-shaped wedge in that little green eye. And it flickered. And as you tuned the dial to your favorite radio station, this green eye would slightly close with just maybe a hairline crack in between the two sides of that green light on there. And when that was set, you knew that you were set for great radio entertainment. We turn off all the lights in the living room. My brother and I would run to the living room and sit on the floor in front of that Zenith radio. And the only light in the living room was the tiny light at the base of that floor lamp, shining through the wrought iron work, casting great shadows on the wall, and the artificial lace curtains we had hanging on the windows. The other light, that soft light behind the dial and the green eye, and we were ready to listen. And listen we did. We heard tales well calculated to keep us in suspense. We heard Eye of the Mystery, the exciting adventures of Jack, Doc, and Reggie of the A1 Detective Agency, solving the mystery of the thing that cries in the night. We rode with the mysterious traveler. We heard Arch Ogler tell us to turn our lights out. Lights out, everybody. And he said, if you don't think that you can stand the excitement that's going to follow, we respectfully invite you to turn off your radio. And we heard this program.
Good evening, friends. This is your host to welcome you through the creaking door into the inner sanctum. Come in. I've been reading my fan mail. Huh? Oh, sure, I get lots of it. Delivered in a hearse every morning. What do you only heart right? Despite your sinister voice, you strike me as a fine gentleman and a homebody. I am companionable, good-natured, unmarried, and I've been hardly dead a year. Won't you please exchange photographs, signed, Lonesome? Did somebody say the lady pooped out of turn?
That was Raymond, the host of the Inner Sanctum, and when he opened that creaking door, chills ran up and down our spine. That was so great. Great stuff. You know, the wonderful thing about radio was that there was a great deal of consistency to it. I mean, a program came on a specific night at a specific time, And generally, it stayed there for 10 years. Now, you watch television now, and a program comes out, oh, this show. I think I'll watch it next week. Next week, it's not there. They moved it to another night and another time. Well, you finally find it 3 or 4 weeks later. You go over there, and then something else is in that spot, and then over here, they change it, and they don't give it any chance at all. They give it no chance at all to survive. If they would only learn the lesson of radio. First of all, have a good show. That's kind of hard to teach. Have a good show, find a spot for it, and put it there. You know, if they would only pay attention to what they're doing right now, the most popular shows of all, whether you like them or not, are the shows that stay in the same time slot. Then they get a great rating for it, it's going strong, and they say, wow, we're going to move it because we want to compete with somebody else because we're going to knock that one out of the box, and they're both gone. But radio, if you were locked up in a dungeon for 4 years, had no contact with the outside world whatsoever, didn't know what day it was ever, what time it was ever, and finally they let you out, and you came out, you didn't know where you were or what time it was, what day it was. All you had to do was to turn on the radio, and you would know. You would, within a few minutes, you would know, oh, this is this program, this is Jack Benny, right? Oh, this must be Sunday night at 6 o'clock. It's between 6 and 6:30. It's the Jack Benny. Oh, I know where I am. I got my first one. I can. That was the wonderful thing about it. You know, you had Sunday night. You had Jack Benny. You had Fred Allen. You had Charlie McCarthy. You had Take It or Leave It. Great quiz program. Take It or Leave It, with the highest contestant getting the big money, $64. $64. And some of them said, I don't think I'm going to answer the $64 question. I'll take my $32 and go home now. So you got all that. Monday night, we had Lux presents Hollywood. The Lux Radio Theater. Cecil B. DeMille giving us hour-long radio versions of popular movies with all the big stars. Followed by the Screen Guild Players with a half-hour version of good old movies. They weren't old movies in those days. They were current movies. Tuesday night, you had Fibber, McGee, and Molly. You had Bob Hope. You had Red Skelton. Wednesday night, you had Mr. District Attorney, champion of the people, guardian of the truth, defender of our fundamental right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sponsored by Ipana and Sal Hepatica. Ipana for the smile of health, Sal Hepatica for the smile of beauty. No, the other way. And every night of the week, Saturday night, we listen to The Life of Riley, Truth or Consequences. We had Your Hit Parade with Frank Sinatra, perhaps singing the #1 song, A Tree in the Meadow. We had the Grand Ole Opry, Judy Canova, and the National Barn Dance coming to you from the 8th Street Theater in Chicago. I'll tell you, those were the days. Those were the days. Fibber, McGee, and Molly, great radio show. One of the great comedy shows of all time. 79 Wistful Vista is where the McGees lived. And they always had a wonderful bit of comedy going on in their show. Now, people who remember but have not heard much of Fibber, McGee, and Molly over all the years since they went off the air, and they were on from 1935 until 1950, one of the long-running radio shows. Then they continued another 10 years doing the short shows, and they worked on Monitor. Remember the NBC Monitor service they had on the weekends, little short pieces? People who haven't listened to the show regularly or haven't heard it recently think that the Fibber McGee's closet opened up on every broadcast and all the junk came tumbling out. Well, it didn't really happen that way. It may have opened 3 or 4 times in a whole season, but it was such a dramatic and dynamic effect that you couldn't wait to hear it, and you didn't think of anything else. Now, when Fibber opened that hall, Fibber didn't usually open the hall closet, although sometimes he said, wait a minute, I think that hunting rifle of mine is in the closet here, and she's yelling, no, McGee, not the hall closet. And he'd open it, and all the junk would come crashing out. More often than not, someone would be in the home, and they say, well, all right, I'll step out the side door here. No, not that door! And all the stuff would come crashing out. And people who listened to it, absolutely loved it. They loved hearing that hall closet, and they knew that Fibber had a hall closet, and they knew what was in it. You and I both heard Fibber's hall closet, and you and I each saw different things in that closet. And as a matter of fact, many's the time my mother said to me, Charles, your room looks like Fibber McGee's closet. Now, very often, I'm very happy to say that a lot of young people who never heard the radio shows before have been tuning into the things we've been doing and enjoying it. That's the great thing. They can discover it, but they stay with it. They enjoy it. They love to listen to the show. And when they hear a Fibber McGee program where the hall closet comes crashing down, they will come up to me and they'll say, or sometime after the fact, they'll come up to me and say, you know, for years, my mother's been telling me that my room looks like Fibber McGee's closet, and I didn't know what she was talking about. But now I know that's where it came from. I mean, everybody had a Fibber McGee's closet, and everybody had the same junk, whether it was under the bed, or in the attic, or in the basement, or whatever it was Fibber McGee's closet. No closet sound here, but listen to this little clip from Fibber McGee and Molly.
The Johnson's Wax Program with Fibber McGee and Molly. Wax products for home and industry present Fibber McGee and Molly with Bill Thompson, Gail Gordon, Arthur Q. Bryan, and me, Harlow Wilcox.
You know, I can just see Mr. Wilcox if his house ever catches fire, getting his Johnson's wax out of the house and then going back after his wife.
Yeah, he reminds me of the way my pop used to be about a job he had when me and him worked at the popcorn works in Peoria.
You never told me about working at the popcorn work.
I never mentioned the job Pop and I had at the Peoria Pop and Popcorn plant.
You never did.
Well, boy, I will. You see, Pop was head popcorn popper at the Peoria Pop and Popcorn plant, and I used to love to watch popcorn. Because Pop was a pit for the popcorn popper, and the popcorn he popped was popcorn plus. I worked over in the pop department myself, see, and every afternoon I'd pop into the popcorn department with a pitcher full of pop for Pop. And we'd sit there popping popcorn by the popperful, opening it into our pusses and pushing it down to the pitcher of pop, so Pop and I were almost spooked from the pop. Popping the popcorn, pouring the pop, poking the popcorn, pushing the pop, poking the pit in the popcorn. Wow!
Now, that's not easy to do. That's not easy to do. But Jim Jordan was a genius. Jim Jordan was a real smart guy. He played Fibber McGee, and his wife, Marion Jordan, played Molly. And they were very smart. They started out on a series of programs in Chicago on WENR. That was the E.N. Rawlins station. They did a program called Smack Out. Then they were on a program called Smith Family. And they did some work on a show called Kelton Meyer's Kindergarten. And then the Johnson's Wax people from Racine, Wisconsin came to them and said, we would like to have you do a half-hour show once a week in the evening hours. It wasn't called prime time then. It was just a nighttime show. And they said, well, we're real interested. We'd love to do this. This is what we want to do. And they said, well, we'll give you a 13-week contract. Now, this was in the middle of April. And Jim Jordan said, no, I don't think so. We need longer time than 13 weeks. Now, the Johnson's Wax people were big radio sponsors, and they were pretty big time. And Jim and Marion were not that big time. This was going to go on the network. And they said, well, no, 13 weeks is all we're going to give you. And then he said, well, we decline. Thank you, but we're going to decline. They said, why? He said, we don't have enough time. We don't think 13 weeks is enough time for us to establish an audience. And besides, you want to start in the middle of April. We're going to go right into the summer. We want at least 26 weeks. Well, the agency talked to Johnson's Wax people, and Johnson's Wax said, well, maybe he's right, but they were kind of surprised that up to this point, anybody who was ever offered any paying job on radio, of course, even today, anybody offered a paying job on radio is happy about it. But he didn't, he said, they said, okay, we'll give it to him. Well, they went on a 26-week contract, and of course, they stayed 25 years. And I had the privilege of meeting and talking with, and even working with Jim Jordan in later years. And I asked him about that at one time. I said, well, what did the sponsors say, about the 26 weeks? He said, well, I asked them at the end of 26 weeks when we got a nice contract renewal, and away we went. They said, what did you think about this? And they said, well, if we had only had 13 weeks, we would have canceled you. But you were right. It took 26 weeks to build a format and build the audience and get your characters and all that sort of thing. So Jim Jordan was right. And there is another lesson to be learned for the television programmers for today, right? Give them a little time to find the audience, to find themselves, and to go with it. But television will never be like radio anyway. Radio was so good. Radio was so much a part of us. I know there were people who heard a radio program back in 1942, any program that they were at, especially a mystery program in 1942. They'll tell me, I still remember that show today. They hadn't heard it since 1942, or like 42 years ago. I can see the pictures as clear as anything in my mind. And I said, what did you watch on television last night? Can't remember is maybe they remember an automobile and a gasoline tank dancing on their TV screen, but nothing about the program. Comedy was big on radio, and a comedian's comedian, a comic's comic, an intellectual, if you will, who was loved by the radio audience and certainly by other comedians. It was a man by the name of Fred Allen. And when Fred Allen took his weekly stroll down Allen's Alley to meet characters like Senator Claghorn and Mrs. Nussbaum, well, that was really a high point of the week. Why don't we take a stroll down Allen's Alley?
Gosh, Portland, it's good to be back in Allen's Alley. Well, let's see what Titus Moody is up to tonight.
Howdy, Bob.
Say, Mr. Moody, you look shorter tonight.
First time I ever wore a union suit and stockings.
What makes you look shorter?
Just trying to keep up my stockings.
Your stockings?
This little door hangs down on the back of the union suit. And when I button that door on my stocking,
Yes.
it pulls me down.
It'll do it every time. Well, Mr. Moody, what do you think about Mayor LaGuardia leaving office?
Why, he's been a good mayor, what there is of him.
Well, what kind of work do you think he should go in for?
He'd be a good man on a farm, Bub.
Well, how do you mean?
He's the only man I know that can milk a cow standing up.
Tell me, Mr. Moody, do you think the mayor is sorry to go?
Oh, I know just how he feels, Bub.
You do, huh?
Yeah, I used to be mayor in my town.
You were mayor?
Yeah, but I wasn't no LaGuardia.
You mean,
After working around the farm for 30 years,
yes?
I didn't smell like no little flower.
Now sometimes, that material is 45 years old. It's still funny. And that was a minute and 25 seconds. Now there is not that much laughter in an hour of situation comedy on television. I know I'm down on television, but it's the truth, right? Sometimes when I play that little clip, and there are young people in the audience, as there are tonight, who don't know what we're talking about with Fiorello LaGuardia. Fiorello LaGuardia, very young person, so I'm going to address this. No questions to be asked. Fiorello LaGuardia was the mayor of the city of New York. And Fiorello is Italian for a little flower. Okay? He didn't smell like no little flower, he said on this. He was a short man, very short man. That's why he could milk a cow standing up. She explained it to really guys. Folks, so good night. I mentioned Jack Benny before. The greatest. Absolutely the greatest. He did what no other I'm back in the barn right now. He did what no other comedian did. Before, then, or since. Jack Benny did not have any punchlines. Jack did not deliver the gag. Jack was the butt of the jokes. All the jokes were about Jack Benny. About his stinginess, about his vanity, about his beat-up old automobile, the Maxwell. All the jokes were at Jack Benny's expense. No other comedian could be that secure in what he was doing as Jack Benny was. Started in 1932 on radio, continued regularly week after week until 1955 on radio. Made a wonderful transition into television and kind of changed his style slightly for television because he couldn't do this on radio very well. Jack Benny and his crazy cast brought us 30 minutes every night, every Sunday night.
Sunday, with Mary Livingston, Son, Harris, Rochester, Devastate, here, throwing on Wolf. Yes, sir, I'm getting to be a pretty good barber. I better take a little more off this side. A little more off this side. Now, whisk off the top. Hey, that looks pretty good now. Oh, hello, Rochester. What are you doing? Just cut your hair, boy. Split out with the
See, the joke at Jack Benny's expense. It was great stuff. It was great stuff. We've talked a lot about the so-called prime time radio shows. All these things were heard at night. And the Shadow was on Sunday afternoons. In Chicago, it was at 4:30. In New York, it was 5:30. In New York, they call them the 5:30 Shadow, 5 o'clock Shadow. Right down. Anyway, all these other shows were evening shows. And you know, the thing about those evening shows, we listened together with our parents. I mean, my mother and dad and my brother and I sat in the living room, or were in the living room, and listened to all these shows together. My mother at the end of that brown mohair sofa, darning socks. Remember darning socks? Remember, it used to be a time when you get a hole in your sock and you mend it. Now what do? Toss it out, right, yeah. See, toss it out. My dad would be in the brown mohair matching easy chair, and he'd be reading the newspaper. The Chicago Herald-American, probably. My brother and I were sprawled on the floor in front of the radio. We listened to all these shows together. And there wasn't one word in any of those shows that would be uttered that would embarrass either the kids or our parents. And we all enjoyed the programs equally. Now, I admit there were some things on the programs that the kids didn't understand. I mean, Fred Allen, for example, would do some adult things. I'm not talking in the sense of adult for today. He would just do things that the kids were too young to understand. But mostly, when the Lux Radio Theater was on doing a radio version of a good movie, we could enjoy it together. I remember sometimes my mother would get down on the floor with us, and we had a big, like a breadboard, a baking board, one of these big things where they roll the pies, roll the dough for the pie on that. What do they do today, right? How much for this pie crust? Roll it out the thing. Anyway, we put a puzzle on there, a jigsaw puzzle, and we build a puzzle on there while we're listening to the radio shows. It was great stuff together. But there was another type of radio going on during the day. During the day, for the ladies at home. Those were the days when ladies were at home during the day. They were on Monday, they were washing. Tuesday, they were ironing. Wednesday, they were maybe mending. Thursday, they were preparing their grocery list. Friday, they were going shopping and house cleaning and all of that sort of thing. There was something doing every day of the week. Just as there were radio programs on every day of the week. But Monday through Friday, from about 9 o'clock in the morning till maybe 4:15 or so in the afternoon, on mostly NBC and CBS, but also on the Mutual Broadcasting System, were soap operas, daytime dramas, daytime radio. And they would tune into one program after another. The Romance of Helen Trent. The story that proved that though a woman is 40 and older, she could still find love and happiness. Lorenzo Jones and his wife Belle. He was a character to the town, but not to his wife Belle, who loved him. We had Stella Dallas. We had our gal Sunday, the girl from a little mining town out west who found happiness with rich and handsome Lord Henry Brinthorpe, who was Superman on another network. One right after another. Young Widder Brown, Ma Perkins. Do you remember Ma Perkins? America's mother of the air.
Oxidol, home Ma Perkins. And now for Ma Perkins. Well, is Ma going to learn the truth about the cousins at last? Yes. Ma told Shuffle that she would ask some questions about the matter of Sylvester denying that he took Willie's and Evie's money. We know that Sylvester did take that money, and Shuffle is sure of it, but Sylvester lied to Ma about it, and that's what Ma has promised to find out.
It took Ma 11 months. Those soap operas lasted episode after episode after episode. You see, sometimes you might miss an episode, right? I mean, 5 days a week. So they had, in a 15-minute show, they usually had a 5-minute recap at the beginning of the show. You heard some of that. Then at the end, they would tell you maybe what's going to happen. Will Ma learn the truth about the cousins? And then, so you would go on, it would move ever so slowly. There was one pregnancy on the show, lasted 2.5 years. It was amazing. Now, of course, the ladies heard those shows during the day, and the kids, I didn't listen to those shows except when I was home sick from school. I got a sore throat, Mom. Let me take a look at it. Looking there, well, I don't know. Maybe you should have some tonsilline. Now, if I said, no, tonsilline was horrible. Horrible tasting stuff. If I said, no, I'll be okay, she knew I was, a little fake going here. But if I really had a sore throat and I had to stay home, okay. My mother had a special spoon for the tonsilline. It was a spoon she got at the 1934 World's Fair, and it had World's Fair picture of a World's Fair building in the spoon. Now this was a sterling silver spoon that you were supposed to polish, but I don't think she ever polished it. And I swear to you, I always thought that that spoon was so tarnished because of the tonsilline that sat in it. Because that's the only time she used that spoon, no. I mean, the bottle, it had a yellow, the tonsilline was yellow in a clear bottle with a picture of a giraffe on the back. A giraffe, because he had a long neck and this was going to cure his squirt. Anyway, tonsilline administered. Thank God I didn't eat cod liver oil. What's that?
Probably had it in it.
Well, it may have been. There was no alcohol in it, I'll tell you that. Anyway, she would say, you're not going out. You're not going to play with your toy soldiers under the kitchen stove like you usually do. You're not going to read comic books. You just got to lie quietly, and I'm going to give you some tea once in a while, maybe another shot of tonsilline later on. But no, you're going to be quiet. But you can listen to the radio. Well, okay, I liked radio. So I'd get in bed, back in bed. My mother would kind of smooth down the sheets and all that. Maybe kind of, she'd do that once in the middle of the day too. Get up, change your pajamas, little refreshers in. It makes you feel better. Only a mother knows that. You know that? Only a mother knows that. So I listened to these soap operas. And you'd hear this whole story, and you'd listen one right after another, all these soaps all day long, Well, you'd feel better at the end of the day, or by the next morning you'd go to school. Maybe you wouldn't get sick again for 6 months. I got a sore throat. Okay, tonsilline, boom, get in bed, listen to the radio. You can pick up those shows just where you left them off 6 months earlier. It was an amazing thing. But the radio that I did listen to during the day was the greatest radio of all time. It was after-school radio. Now you're talking after programming just for the kids. After school television today, what? Reruns of something, maybe. Cartoon shows, maybe. But no adventure shows, really adventure shows for kids. Like the Tom Mix Ralston Straight Shooters. And here comes Tom Mix, shredded Ralston for your breakfast. You hear the adventures of what? Jack Armstrong, the all-American boy. Have you tried Wheaties? The best breakfast food in the land. I mean, we heard Dick Tracy, Tennessee Jed. Kids in the 30s grew up listening to Little Orphan Annie. Kids in the 40s listened to Captain Midnight. We all enjoyed these radio shows because of the premiums. I mean, you would send in box tops to get your secret decoders and your shake-up mugs and your whistling sheriff's badges. Tom Mix had a whistling sheriff's badge. It was a badge you could hang on, and also a whistler. If you needed help, you would whistle for help. A year later, that same badge with the whistle in it came out as a ring, a whistling ring. You would and they had secret compartments in these things. It was great. I remember somebody offered a periscope. You know, a periscope. You look in here, you look up there. So you're supposed to be, a periscope is what? In a submarine. You're underwater, right? Well, the only water I ever got in was in the bathtub. There wasn't enough water to get under in the bathtub. So we devised a way, and I think the announcer on the radio show too suggested this to us, that you could also look around corners to see if during the war enemy agents were near. So we would look, we'd take in periscope, look here, and at the corner of the schoolhouse, see, we look here, and we look through there, see what we can see. We look in there, you know what we saw? Some kid over here looking at that. It was amazing. Kellogg's Pep, the super delicious cereal, presents, look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman! Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Mild-mannered reporter for the Daily Planet, Clark Kent, steps into a telephone booth and outstreaks Superman, the Man of Steel. Kellogg's Pep. We loved listening to Superman because of the sponsor Kellogg's Pep. You didn't have to send away a box top. The cereal itself came packaged with premiums. Little tiny Pep pins. Little buttons that had comic strip characters printed on them. Skeezix and Sluggo. Superman. If you had a Superman, you could get two of anything else when you traded for them. You put them on your beanie or in your jacket. I mean, all the comic, Winnie Winkle, the Cats and Jammer Kids, $2. It was wonderful. The only thing wrong, nobody liked the cereal. Kellogg's Pep was really strong. So in the pantry, off our kitchen at home, we had a row of opened but uneaten boxes of Kellogg's Pep, standing behind the row of open but uneaten jars of Ovaltine. We had to have the Ovaltine because you needed 2 ear seal rings from 2 jars of Ovaltine plus 10 cents in coin or stamp. Wasn't that great? In coin or stamp. Now, then you could send away and get a secret decoder or a shake-up mug or one of the other Captain Midnight premiums. And this was terrific because they also said, send in 2 inner seal rings from 2 jars of Ovaltine or a reasonable facsimile. There wasn't a kid in the audience who knew what a reasonable facsimile was. We asked our parents, who mostly also didn't know what a reasonable facsimile was. Not today, they got fax machines all over the place, right? But I wonder how many people today using fax machines know that fax comes from facsimile, and facsimile means a reproduction of the original. See? So they were saying, send in a reasonable facsimile, a reasonable reproduction of the original, which means you would draw it. So now you're supposed to draw 2 inner seal rings from 2 jars of, or some other sponsor offered a reasonable facsimile of a box top. Now, we never did this. I don't know of anybody who ever sent in a reasonable facsimile because we were always afraid that our facsimile would not be reasonable. I mean, if some guy opened this up and said, not reasonable, boom, we never get the decoder. So I sent away 2 rings from 2 jars of Ovaltine, along with 10 cents in coiner stamp, and I was waiting for my secret decoder. The next day, it didn't come. I was pretty mad. 2 days later, it still didn't come. I'm still pretty mad. By the end of the week, I'm at the corner waiting for the mailman, and still no package from the Wander Company of Villa Park, Illinois. Waiting, driving my mother and the mailman nuts. Finally, one day, a package comes for Charles Schaden. I knew. It didn't say Captain Midnight on it, but I knew what it was. Grabbed it out of the hands of the mailman, ran into my home, into the house, into my room, closed the door, opened the package. There was my 1947 secret decoder. This was terrific. The dial on there, and it had the manual, full color, with pictures of Captain Midnight and Chuck Ramsey, and all the other members of the secret squadron we used to listen to on the radio. A message from the announcer, Pierre Andre, and it told us how to decode the messages that were given to us listeners at the end of the Captain Midnight broadcast. I was ready. That afternoon, Captain Midnight came on the air. Pierre Andre says, and be sure to stay tuned at the end of today's exciting adventure for a secret message for all members of the secret squadron. Oh, what? I got a pad of paper. I've got my decoder. I've got 6 well-sharpened pencils in case one would break. I'd be ready. And at the end of the story, Pierre Andre said, "Okay, gang, set your secret decoder for A equals 14. Take down this message: 21, 16, 11, 3, 9, 12. Got that? Happy landing!" Captain Midnight flew off, and I flew into my room with the paper on which I had taken down the message, the pencils, my secret decoder, and the manuals. I ran into the room, I closed the door, I put the chair under the doorknob, turned down the shade, took out my Tomix pen-light flashlight, and I decoded the secret message. And it said, "Drink Ovaltine."
Yes, Captain Midnight talks to you every day, Monday through Friday, with the makers of Ovaltine, America's favorite food drink. Now, have you heard the news? The news about that marvelous new 2-piece, bright-colored shake-up mug Captain Midnight has for you? That big, handsome 2-in-1 shaker-upper is used to make ice-cold company shake-ups to drink every day? Well, sir, Captain Midnight has one for you almost as a gift. And listen, it's something you want to stand in for tonight, for sure.
Yeah, I had one of those too. You know, those were the days. We used our imaginations. We had all the fun of listening to the programs. We enjoyed the excitement of it. And they're gone. Really, we can't go back. We can tune in, though, and listen to the shows again, because a lot of them are available on tape. You can find tape off in the library. Not this one, the new one. Maybe they should have tapes of the radio shows over there. If they don't, tell them to get some, you know. And, or tune us in at midnight. Love to have you tune us in at midnight. I have one more sound, but before we present that sound, are there any questions about the radio days? Anybody got a question or about anything we've talked about here? Okay.
Yes.
Yes,
And you still got your decoder.
I do. But it's obsolete because in 1948 they came out with a new one. And I had to convince my mother all over again to buy 2 more jars of Ovaltine, and she said, "You still didn't eat the 2 from last year." You know, the problem with Ovaltine was that when you put 2 teaspoons of it in milk, it didn't dissolve it. The mound of Ovaltine sat there on top of the milk. I mean, it was heavier than milk, and it sat on top of it. You know, and then you do this with it with a spoon. You stir it up. You'd stir it up and you mix it up, and it still wouldn't dissolve. I mean, you could stomp on that sucker and it wouldn't dissolve. Now they have a new improved Ovaltine, and it does dissolve, but it doesn't taste bad like the good stuff did.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm familiar with Garrison Keillor, but is anyone trying to revive radio in that way, like doing live plays on an ongoing basis or programs anywhere?
There's nothing consistent on it. In little pockets of radio here and there, try to do something. I wish they would do something new. Now, you're going to be doing something here, right?
Give me a pocket, too.
You know, in certain communities here and there, someone is writing an original play for radio and they're producing it and playing it. NPR will do some of this stuff from time to time, National Public Radio. Unfortunately, most of the stuff that's done is radio versions of the classics. I'm talking about the classics of literature. And there's a small audience for that. If someone could do what I like to call pulp radio, I mean, take Sherlock Holmes and give us a half-hour mystery every week of Sherlock Holmes with some new actors. I mean, we can't get Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce anymore. But if they would do something like that, I think they'd find an audience for it. And if they did some mysteries, and if creative, daring, devil-may-care managers of rock and roll radio stations.
What about country stations?
Country station, you could do it too. But if you put some good radio mysteries on any rock station, and in effect expose this to a younger audience, they would be amazed at the response they would get. I guarantee you. And in fact, if they would take some of the old radio shows, if they took Inner Sanctum and Suspense and Lights Out and The Shadow, they would be surprised at the audience.
Green Lantern.
Pardon?
Got to have Green Lantern.
Green Lantern. Yes, sir. You got a question?
The one I always remember, I think it was Jack Armstrong's hycometer.
That's right. A hycometer or pedometer.
Okay.
Right. That was a hycometer. This is the thing you would clip onto your belt. And, or if you're wearing high-top shoes with your knickers, you clip it on right next to the penknife down there, right? And it would click off your mileage. Well, you walk around like this all the time. That was the only time in my life I wanted to go to the store for my mother. I need mileage. Let's go. I need mileage. You could knock off a lot of mileage with that. You know, in the last several years, I walk every morning for exercise. I take a good brisk walk, and I said to my wife, I would love to have a Jack Armstrong hycometer, because I'd like to know how far I'm going. I'm just estimating, I'm usually about 3 miles or so. And she got me a modern pedometer for a birthday or Christmas or something. And so it took me half the summer to figure out how to calibrate this thing. You got to find a quarter of a mile track. So I went over by a track and I walked them on the track, and the thing about it doesn't really click. It's not round, and the worst of all, it doesn't have Jack Armstrong's picture on it. It's not the same. But the pedometer hycometer was great. The Lone Ranger gave out a pedometer too. The Lone Ranger, believe this, in 1945, the Lone Ranger offered an atomic bomb ring. Now, I maybe could believe the Lone Ranger got killed in an automobile, but what the heck was the Lone Ranger doing with an atom bomb ring? I mean, he was out in the 1890s or something like that. It was wonderful. It was a great time. And I want to end with a great, yes, sir?
I'm a big fan of Gene Shepard. He
Yeah.
did some great radio in the 70s and mostly the late 60s and 70s. Is he doing anything at all? Is he still around?
He's still around. I'm not aware of his doing anything on the air now. There are some cassette tapes of some of his Ollie Hoopnagel and stuff like that, some of the monologues.
TV shows,
Yeah. Well, yeah, but there's some audio tapes of some of the stories adapted from his book, In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash. Radio's all-time favorites, Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll, were Amos and Andy.
7 million, 8 million, 10 million.
Yes, I do. Tell them. Say, Andy, what are you thinking over there, son?
Well, Amos, now that we is in New York, I'm going into broker business. I'm thinking on the money I'm going to make here. I'm counting on being another Jake Ping Pong Morgan.
I think Wall Street, Andy, is a little too high for us, son, but I tell you what, we ought to get some kind of job.
Yeah, that's right. We don't want to keep on nibbling on our savings here.
You know, I got the evening paper here. I thought we could look into help one of there and see what they got in there.
Yeah, give me that thing. Let me see here. Look at this news item here. It say we is exporting cheese to France and all the Frenchmen is happy about it.
Where do it say that, Andy?
Right here in this headline, look at that. Thousands cheer as Limburger arrives in Paris.
That was radio. This was a lot of fun. I thank you very much for being here tonight. I hope that maybe I can come back again sometime.
Chuck has a busy schedule. He's just telling me his deadlines are coming due on the next issue of the Nostalgia Digest, but I'm sure he will answer a few questions for you before he heads back up north. So if you want to just kind of mingle and... Judy, want to
Well, I just wanted to ask about Nostalgia Digest, because every time I hear the Saturday show, I think, why don't I subscribe and I never do it? Because I'm usually in the car and forget about it. You want to tell us how? And the address?
The Nostalgia Digest is a magazine that we have that comes out 6 times a year, every other month. And it is filled with articles from and about the good old days of radio, movies, television, the big band era. It also carries the detailed listing of our Saturday afternoon, those were the day's broadcast, and a calendar giving you an idea of what we're playing in our midnight program. A 1-year subscription is $15, and a 2-year subscription is $25. And if you'd like to subscribe, all you have to do is, if you want to do it tonight, just give me your name and address, and we'll send you the first issue with a bill.
Okay.
Okay?
I'll sign up.
Okay.
Thanks again. Come on down if you have a question or meet Chuck, and
Let's throw a log on the air conditioner.
No, I think